In this episode, I am speaking with Brenda Bernstein, who is the author of How to Write a Killer LinkedIn Profile and 18 Mistakes to Avoid. This is a rebroadcast of episode 160 from January 2020, which was right before the beginning of the pandemic. This is one of the top downloaded episodes of all time for this podcast. I thought now would be a good time to rebroadcast it as the topics Brenda discuss are timeless. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 308 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. In this episode, I'm speaking with Brenda Bernstein, who is the author of How to Write a Killer LinkedIn Profile and 18 Mistakes to Avoid. This is a rebroadcast of episode 160 from January 2020, which was right before the beginning of the pandemic. This is one of the top downloaded episodes of all time for this podcast. I thought now would be a good time to rebroadcast it as the topics Brenda discusses are timeless. Let me read you her bio. Brenda Bernstein, award-winning certified executive resume master, certified master resume writer, and accomplished editor and LinkedIn trainer, holds an English degree from Yale University and a JD from NYU School of Law. Her signature presentations on how to write a killer LinkedIn profile have been attended by thousands of job seekers and other professionals seeking to establish a professional image on LinkedIn. Over her 15 years as an editor at the Essay Expert, Brenda has coached hundreds of professionals and companies to write resumes, essays, and other materials that result in sought-after job interviews, admission to top schools, and measurable business success. She has written 3 highly acclaimed books: How to Write a Killer LinkedIn Profile, How to Write a Winning Resume, and How to Write a Stellar Executive Resume. However, before we get to the episode, let's have a word from our sponsor, Career Pivot. The Career Pivot membership community is a group from all over the U.S. and Canada with diverse backgrounds. This is a community where everyone is there to help everyone else out figure out what they want to do in the second half of life and then make it happen. Many have made changes that they did not know existed or was possible when they came to the community. They learned from each other and broadened their horizons on what was really possible. Let's hear what Debbie had to say about being part of the community.
The main things I'm getting out of the community are accountability and support. Just getting on every week and talking with people from the What's Next group and seeing the same people every week, watching everyone else's progress kind of motivates me to do more, and also feeling like, yeah, there are other people out there that are watching, and just motivates me to keep moving on my journey. And I also paired up with an accountability partner, and we have calls every other week. And so we've been looking over each other's resumes and just talking about, what we plan to do, what we're enjoying, what we're not enjoying. So I think just having somebody there to bounce ideas around with is really helpful. And also, I think as I've gone through this journey with the people in the What's Next group, we're getting to know each other. I feel like I'm getting great feedback from everybody because they can see things that I can't see it's also nice to have people who are cheering you on, and they're going to cheer you on through your successes, and they're going to help you through your failures, and you're going to learn from other people's experiences.
I'm recruiting new members. If you are interested in learning more about the endeavor, please go to careerpivot.com/community. When I recorded this episode, Brenda was in the process of publishing the 14th edition. In 2022, she published the 16th edition. Therefore, she is constantly keeping this book up to date. Now, on to my discussion with Brenda Bernstein. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the joy of having Brenda Bernstein, the author of How to Write a Killer LinkedIn Profile and the 18 Mistakes to Avoid. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you.
I'm totally impressed. This is the 14th edition of this book.
I know. Crazy, isn't it? How did I do that?
I have thought about years ago writing a LinkedIn book, and then I went, nah, this stuff changes too fast.
It does. It changes at rapid speed. Although I would say the bones of it and what makes a good LinkedIn profile hasn't really changed over time. You know, I recently looked back at one of my earlier editions or like some of my earlier webinars. And I thought, oh, should I take these off my website? Because they must be so outdated. And when I looked at them, I was shocked to find out that so much of what I said 10 years ago still applies. Because when you're talking about how to write a good profile, that's still the same. There's still the same principles at work, even though the actual platform and like what buttons you press and what it looks like has changed. The theory hasn't changed.
You are correct. It's writing a good LinkedIn profile. You're still writing sales copy. You're still wanting to bring out the best in you and tell the story that you want to tell. And that's kind of platform independent.
Exactly. And you still want to, you want people to find you for the right things, and you want to write about yourself well. And all of that is still the same.
We're going to shape this interview around the 3 L's. So what are those 3 L's? And why don't you start with the first one?
So my 3 L's are locatability, likability, and aliveness. Those are the 3 L's. So locatability, you want to be able to be found on LinkedIn. You want people to find you. So how do you make that happen? How do you create your profile to optimize the search results, and people are going to find you on LinkedIn. And then once they find you, that's when the likability comes in, because you want them to actually reach out to you, communicate with you, and not see your profile and think, oh, this person isn't worth talking to. You want to grab their attention somehow with your profile so that they continue to interact with you. So that's the likability. And then the third L, which of course I've fudged a little bit, it's the second letter of aliveness, but I still like it. So aliveness is, are you going to stay active? Because if you just create a profile and let it sit there, it's like, that famous metaphor, you get a gym membership and then you sit on the couch, so you're not going to get a lot out of it. So the aliveness is how you continue to interact with the platform, and not just with the platform, but with the people who you actually meet on LinkedIn. And that's where you're really going to get your ROI, your return on investment on LinkedIn.
Yeah, the one problem that my audience has, or at least I believe they have, is the last one. I'll put it bluntly, most of us guys over 50, we don't want to share on social media. We don't want to interact, but we have to.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that. We're probably going to do the 3 L's in order. So when we get to the third one, we can talk a lot about the value of interacting with people on LinkedIn and some ways to do that.
Okay, so let's start with the first, locatability.
Locatability on LinkedIn. So there are two main factors that relate to locatability on LinkedIn. One is your number of connections, and of course, the quality of your connections. The bigger network you have, as long as it's a quality network. I would never advocate just accepting every single invitation that ever comes your way. But if they're respectable people that might have connections that you might find valuable, then you want to build that network. And that helps you because when people do a search on LinkedIn, the way that it comes out is your first degree connections come up first. And then after that, your second degree connections, which are the connections of your direct connections. And you might not even see any of those third degree connections when you do a search, especially if you don't have a paid account. So you only get 100 search results and you might not even get to the people. So if someone's looking for you and they have a very, very big network, they're only going to see maybe first and second degree connections, and you might not show up in their search, even if you have the second piece, which is your keywords optimized, which help you also with your locatability. But if you don't have the big network so that you come up as a first or second degree connection with someone, you're not going to show up on their search results.
So let me ask you this. How many connections is enough connections?
It's a really good question, and I wish I had the exact right answer to that for a long time, and people still say, well, you want to have at least 500 connections. That sounds like a big number to some people. It sounds like a small number to other people. I'm up to, I think 9,000 something I don't even know how many connections I have now. So, 500 to me doesn't seem like a particularly large number. But, some people who are just starting out, that might seem like a big number. I think it's a lot smaller than you realize, because if you went to college, you probably have 500 people who are alumni of that institution who you could potentially connect with. If you have worked in any jobs, you have a boss, and you might have vendors that you worked with, or clients or coworkers. You have classmates. You have family. Don't forget about your family. If you're a member of any organization, you can connect with people, other members of that organization. There are so many people that you can connect with that maybe you don't think of off the top of your head now. But once you start putting energy into building your network, I think you'll find that you can get to 500 pretty quickly. Now, whether 500 is enough, I can't really tell you. But I think that so many people have at least 500 connections that 500 might not be the magic number anymore. So I would really go for 1,000, especially if you have 500 and you're just sort of sitting there because you think, oh, I made my 500 connections, I can stop now. Don't stop, because if you have 500 more quality connections, that is going to help you when people might be looking for someone like you.
Yeah, the way I wrote a blog post on this, and I had one guy who was getting into pharmacogenomics, the modeling of drugs, the mathematical modeling of drugs. And we only found 3,000 or 4,000 people total who had any of that in their profile. So he connected with about 200 people, the top people, and that was, for him, that was probably enough. But if you're a fairly generic person in a fairly generic job, you're correct. Probably 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 was probably enough. If you're like you and me, who, right, our market is the world, then probably the more the better.
Exactly.
So you're right. It depends.
Up to a point, right? Because I get a lot of connections. I have to be careful, and everyone has to be careful, because there are fake profiles out there. I got one the other day. To really look at the profile. I got one the other day. I think the person was from Pakistan or a place like that, which is a little bit of a sign. Now, there are legitimate people in India and Pakistan, and there are a lot of people who are faking profiles in those areas. So, I got one, and I looked at the recommendations under his profile, and they were for different people. Like, the names did not match his name on his actual name on the profile, and the names were different in the two different recommendations. And I thought, this can't possibly be a real legitimate person, So watch out for things like that. If someone doesn't have a lot of connections, you need to really make sure that they're for real. They might be a new graduate and they don't have a lot of connections, that's fine. But, if their picture looks a little too perfect, there are certain things that are little like red flags. Don't connect with everyone. But look for people who you do want to connect with and actually seek them out. It's worth putting a little time into that.
So besides having a good large network or appropriately sized network, what's the other thing about locatability?
Yeah, so the other piece is your keywords. So you want to have good keywords that are going to help you get found. And you kind of alluded to that too, right? In what you were just saying. If you have a very generic job, it's going to be harder to get found just for your keywords, but you still need to put them in there. The more that you can find a niche, the better, because then there are going to be fewer results and you're more likely to come up in that maybe top 100. So keywords, you need to put first priority will be in your headline. You don't want to put a lot of students make this mistake. They write like student at the University of Maryland. Okay, that's not going to get you found. No one's looking for student. But if you put your major or you put the industry that you want to work in, if you put, marketing and, or digital media, then you're going to be doing a little bit better. You just want to make sure that you have those keywords in your job title. Once you're an executive, or mid-level or wherever you are, you want to make sure that you put your job title in that headline. Don't default to your current job title exactly as it is in the organization where you are. That's not going to help you very much. Maybe if you work at a big name company, you still want that in your headline because maybe people are searching and they're doing just a regular search for people who, are, executives at like IT managers or director of IT, and they might put IBM because they're trying to pull people from IBM, but the thing is they can find you other ways by looking at for your company because you have that in your experience section. So it's, you can do it. It probably won't hurt you, but you definitely want to have that specific job title because people are looking for job titles. If a recruiter goes on LinkedIn, they're looking for people to fill job titles. So they will search for, product manager, and then they'll search for the industry in which they're looking for a product manager. So you want all those things in your job title. The more specific, the better. And you got to put yourself in a recruiter head. I know one way to do that is to look at job descriptions and see what are the job titles that they might be looking for and what are the keywords that keep showing up in those job descriptions as well. What's the skill set that they're going to be looking for? So you can put some of that in your headline. And then if you can, so you have 120 characters to use in the headline. If you have maxed out, you've used all the keywords that you want to use, you might want to string them together or put some kind of value proposition, unique selling proposition, we call it, or unique value proposition, so that it sounds sort of like a tagline too. So, but I would say that's like second priority, and first priority would be getting those keywords in. The second place that's really important to have keywords is your job titles. And this is something that people rarely understand, but you don't have to just put your job title in the job title field. You put your job title, but then you have 100 characters to use. So if it's not a really long job title that takes up all 100 characters, then you can continue writing the job title and put some keywords after it. So that's the second most important place to put keywords. And after that, put them wherever you want. Put them in your summary, put them in your job descriptions, there's also the skills section. So you want to make sure that you use the skills section well. Recruiters will have software that allows them to search in the skills section. So you definitely want to have your skills there as well.
Yeah, the one thing that I tell people is your current job title is so important because that's where a lot of recruiters search on. Yes. And one of the challenges is very often people wear multiple hats in their jobs, and their job title their official job title doesn't really say what they do. Right. So I've worked with a lot of product managers, and I always tell them to put, the official job title, followed by a vertical bar, and then every other job title that makes sense. Yes. And the key piece is don't lie. Right. Right? So that you'll be found for these other things. The other ones I find is business analysts who may be also project managers. They tend to wear a lot of hats, and you want to put all of them in there. Yes, exactly. So that's why, look at those job descriptions that are out there and make sure that you have those keywords in. Those are your keywords. The job titles that are either right before the job that you want to have, or possibly the job that you have now, or, but at a larger organization. Because you're a product manager at a small organization, you might want to become a product manager at a large organization, right? So then product manager, but look for the job title and just get it in there. Right. You definitely want that, because that is what recruiters are looking for. So let's move on to likability. How can I be likable?
Okay. Number one, the visuals. Humans are very visual people. The first thing that they see is
your picture.
Your picture. That is the first thing that they see when they look on your profile. So make sure you have a good one. You want to be engaging. There's something called branded photography that I ascribe to, where the photographer actually asks you to come up with the 3 words that you want to convey through your image. And then the photographer looks for that as they're taking the photos. And then when you're choosing the photos, you choose the one that conveys those 3 characteristics the best.
I love that title. Because one of the things I've always told when I do profile reviews at my old job club is I'd ask them, what do you want this picture to say? And they usually go, huh? What message do you want to deliver? And they go, huh? Yeah.
Right. I like the 3 words, and you can spend some time thinking, what are the 3 words that capture who I am, that I want to put out there into the world?
Yeah, I had one guy who was an engineer. He was a geek. And he was standing out in a field with a tree behind him. And I told him, I said,
not on brand.
I said, no, you need to be standing in front of a bunch of geeky stuff. And you can define what geeky means. And
exactly.
And I had another guy who was electronic data interchange guy, an EDI guy, and he was standing in front of a bookshelf filled with EDI books. I said, that's cool. Because it says, you know your stuff.
Yep.
I like the idea of coming up with the 3 words to tell the photographer beforehand to say, this is what I'm trying to convey. Sorry.
Well, and then there's the background behind, not in your photo itself, but on LinkedIn, there's the banner that's behind your photo.
And what do you advise people to do with that?
Well, I advise putting something there other than this kind of bluish background with the dots that are all connected. That's, some representation of a network, right? Don't do that. Make sure you have something else there, because most people do now. And if you don't have it, it doesn't look good.
Yeah, I had one young lady come into my job club where she was a bilingual educator.
Yeah.
And she had a really cool kind of image of a classroom, And I said, you need to take that picture, throw it in Canva, and throw a Spanish tagline in there that just jumps out and says, I'm a bilingual educator.
So it's different for everybody. You know, for lawyers, you probably want a courthouse or a library of law books or, you know, something. The danger of putting text in is that the location of that image changes depending on whether you're on a desktop or a laptop or mobile. So when you have words, sometimes they get blocked by your image. So you need to test it on different size screens and make sure that it works on all of them. So just a little warning about that. Don't put too many words in there. You want mostly visuals that would be okay if they get covered up.
That's good advice. So what's the next thing to be likable?
The next thing in your profile is your summary section, because that's the next thing that shows up. So your summary section is an important place to put forth your personality and not just sort of copy your resume summary over onto LinkedIn and call it a day, because you're not going to actually attract attention there. So you can use your summary. You can write, you know, headlines and subheaders and things like that. You don't have a lot of graphic capability in there, but you can insert anything that's in Unicode. You can insert into your profile. So you can do this in your headline too. You can put a star, an arrow, or anything that you find in Unicode. So play around with that and write your summary in an engaging way. And I have some examples in my book. You can even see some of them on my website of people who have written their profiles in their own unique way. And I don't think there's one way to do it. The point is, there's not one way to do it. You want to do it in the way that best conveys who you are. So like if you're geeky, write a geeky summary, right? If you're a salesperson, you know, I've had people talk about battering sales goals with a baseball bat, you know, and stuff like that. So who are you? And tell us. And that's going to attract attention in a positive way. So those are the main things with the profile itself. And then there's how do you reach out to people? How do you communicate with people? You're not going to be very likable if you hit connect and don't write a note.
Yeah, one of the things obviously we all have to do is personalize things and actually make the effort to actually say, hi, this is who I am. Would you connect with me?
Right. And beyond that, you know, hi, I noticed this about you and I really appreciated it. Would you connect with me? You know, let them know that you actually know who they are. And that makes you likable.
Let's move on to aliveness.
Okay. So there are a lot of ways to stay alive on LinkedIn. There's some basic things like keep connecting with people. Keep updating your profile. Share things. When there's if you write an article, share it. When you see other people post articles that interest you, like them, comment on them, share them. People like it when you share their things. They really appreciate it. It creates connection. So that's one way. And even just having some multimedia aspects to your profile itself is more alive than just having the black and white profile. And LinkedIn fairly recently in the last couple of years has really made that possible, that you can attach presentations and articles and images to your profile itself.
What do you think about writing, articles on LinkedIn?
I think it's a great thing to do. There are a lot of articles out there, so I wouldn't expect too much out of it. But if you write a good article, people will see it and comment on it if you have a strong network, especially. And, you can post it other places too. You don't have to just post it on LinkedIn. It's a good place to post it. But you can put it on your Facebook page, on Instagram, or like wherever you are. You can post wherever you'd like and share it and get it out there. If you have a blog, etc., There's no rule that you have to only post it on LinkedIn. You can post your own, if you have a blog, post your blog articles also on LinkedIn.
Yeah, one of the things I tell people is when they're trying to make a pivot and shift is go write, something that shows that you know your stuff. And because you wrote it, and it will show up on your LinkedIn profile. So when people go there, they go, oh, this person actually knows what they're talking about.
Yes, it shows up on your profile. People can see what your recent activity is. And if part of that activity is that you posted an article that you wrote, then it definitely reflects well on you. And it is something that recruiters look for. If you're a job seeker, they look for, well, what have you shared? What have you written? Are you a thought leader? They also do see how much you've interacted with other people's content, because you think about it, companies want to hire people who are going to be team players. And that is part of being a team player. So in some ways, you're interviewing for your next job in how you interact with the content on LinkedIn.
So how often do you recommend that people get on LinkedIn to show that they're alive?
I would do it at least like 15, 20 minutes a day.
So the idea is to do it every day, but you don't, as I've always tell people, just get on first thing in the morning. Mm-hmm. Just allocate time to do that.
Yeah. And if that doesn't, if that 15 minutes a day doesn't work for you, put it on your schedule somewhere, at least a couple of times a week. If it's 30 minutes twice a week, because that works better for you, do it. You just do something. It's just better than not doing anything. It's that gym membership again.
We always go back to the gym membership.
And, so one of the things, yeah, exactly. So, one of the things you can do when you're on there is reach out and make new connections. You can think about who you might write a recommendation for, or you can go and request recommendations. You can share and post content. You can say congratulations to people, because you can find out, did they get a new job? Are they having a work anniversary? Is it their birthday? Wish happy birthday, say congratulations. I do that. I mean, I'm fortunate to have assistants who help me with that, because with 9,000 connections, it's a lot. But I wish everyone a happy birthday on LinkedIn. And every once in a while, someone thanks me and says they have been thinking, oh, they really should get in touch with me, and they end up wanting to work with me because I wished them a happy birthday and they were reminded of who I am. So it's a way to definitely stay in front of people. If they want to interact with you, then that will remind them about it, and they will. So that's another way to stay alive on LinkedIn. Well, the other important piece about staying alive on LinkedIn is actually getting off of LinkedIn. If you just stay on LinkedIn and interact online with people, you're not going to get very far, to be honest. You really need to make real life connections. And when I first started on LinkedIn, which was back at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, it was such a much smaller community. And whenever you interacted with someone, you would talk to them, like really have a conversation on the phone. You might share advice, help each other out with something. And some of those connections that I made back then have made such a huge difference in building my company. I got my first ideas for doing LinkedIn profile reviews from someone I met way back then who recommended I do that. And it's become a really big piece of my business. And I also got connected back then to the first person who got me in front of like 500 people for a webinar. Now, there's so many connections, it's a little overwhelming. So it takes a little more work to suss out who is it that I actually want to talk to on the phone. I've had people, when I reach out to connect to them, say, I'd be happy to connect with you, but before I accept your invitation, I need to speak with you on the phone for about 15 minutes. I've only had one person do that, but in a way, it's a really good strategy. That person led me to some other connections that have become one of my biggest referral sources. Never know.
Yeah, we reach a point where you mean I actually need to talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. It's getting out from behind the computer screen and getting out and meet people. This is really critical for folks of my age demographic. Is the fact that our next position almost always comes from a relationship.
It's not just your age demographic.
And you mean really other people have the same problem?
It's the way that people work. As much as we're all into our computers and cell phones, people still want that human contact and the human referrals. Most jobs are still gotten through referral and through networking.
You're right. And the key is to keep on reaching out and using, I claim LinkedIn is a good way to track my network, but getting on LinkedIn isn't really networking.
Exactly. Networking is using those connections to make deeper connections. Every time I travel, I will look at who might I want to meet for lunch with in the place I'm traveling. People are very open and very excited to meet over coffee because I'm in town, and I've also made some of my most important connections that way. Those face-to-face meetings, taking someone out to lunch is huge. Don't underestimate the power of taking someone out to lunch. It's not a coincidence for me, like in my business. When I look back at who are my most reliable referral sources, who I've gotten the most business from, almost every single one of them I've had lunch with. It's not a coincidence.
You're a best-selling author. Of course, everybody wants to have lunch with you. So Brenda, we've been going here about half an hour. Is there anything else you want to tell my audience about writing a killer LinkedIn profile?
The thing that I really do like to tell everyone, this is another thing you hear a lot, but do you. That is the main thing I tell people. Don't try to do it like anyone else. You can use other people for inspiration. That's fine. But the more you can come across as a unique human being, let your personality shine through, be yourself, not just on LinkedIn, but also out in the world with some of the people you meet on LinkedIn, the better results you're going to get.
So Brenda, if someone wanted to reach out and work with you and wanted to buy your book, how would they do that?
You can find my book on Amazon. It's called How to Write a Killer LinkedIn Profile. It is in ebook form, and also you can get it in print. The print version I wrote at the beginning of this year, and it comes with a free copy of the ebook as well. So when the ebook gets updated, you'll get the update, even if all the images in the book might not be completely updated because it's in print. But the ebook will be updated soon, within the next couple of months. I'm in the midst of revising it right now. So, and if you get the ebook now, you can always get the new edition at no cost. So there's no risk to you. Oh, should I wait? You don't have to wait. You can get it now and start working on it, and then you can get the new one. And please reach out to me on LinkedIn and practice writing a customized message. You can find me. I'm Brenda Bernstein on LinkedIn.
And what's your website?
My website is www.theessayexpert.com. That is TheEssayExpert, theessayexpert.com. And I also have theexecutiveexpert.com if there are executives listening in on this call.
Thank you for telling us how to write a killer LinkedIn profile on this podcast. So thank you for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure, Mark.
The 3 L's of LinkedIn are timeless. Pick up a copy of her book and give some time to the 3 L's of LinkedIn. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com, sign up for the weekly Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You'll get a weekly update on this podcast, white papers, and new blog posts. I recently published my latest white paper, Ageism, the Last Acceptable Bias. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community, which can be found at careerpivot.com/community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Career Pivot on Facebook and LinkedIn. You'll also find me on Twitter at Career Pivot, although I am not tweeting anymore, at least at this moment. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-308. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.